Mafia boss secretly entered his own restaurant and froze hearing manager humiliate black waitress. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a typical evening in New York City's most exclusive Italian restaurant, Morello's. The chandeliers gleamed, casting a warm glow on the polished marble floors. The rich aroma of freshly baked bread and simmering pasta filled the air as elegantly dressed patrons chatted amongst themselves. But amidst the luxury, the evening was about to take a dark turn. Nia Carter, a young black waitress in her mid-20s, was doing what she did best, quietly serving her guests and doing everything she could to remain invisible. She had worked at Morello's for the past 6 months, but it wasn't the grandiosity of the restaurant or the wealthy clientele that made her stay. It was the paycheck, the one thing that kept her from being swallowed by the ever-present burden of bills and student loans. Nia had long since learned to keep her head down and her voice quiet. She had learned to endure the glances, the whispers, and the occasional cruel comment, knowing that her job, no matter how humiliating at times, was what kept her afloat. But tonight was different. As Nia approached the high-profile table, her hand steadied the wine bottle, preparing to pour for the distinguished guests seated at table 7. The man sitting at the center, his expensive suit and cold eyes gleaming under the soft light, didn't look up. His fiancée, a blonde woman with an air of superiority, gave Nia a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll have the red, please," the woman said, but not before her eyes flicked over Nia's worn-out shoes and tired uniform. The comment was a slight, small enough that the others didn't notice, but to Nia, it felt like a slap across her face. She ignored it, forcing a polite smile and silently pouring the wine. As she turned to walk away, she overheard a voice. "You know, she looks like she should be cleaning the bathrooms, not serving the finest wine," the man said, his tone dripping with disdain. Nia's stomach twisted, but she kept walking, pretending she hadn't heard. But the insult wasn't over. "Do you even understand the value of this wine?" The man's voice rang out again. His words were meant to sting, and they did. Nia's hand trembled as she walked back to the kitchen, the weight of the man's words pressing on her chest like a stone. The kitchen staff went silent as she entered, but she didn't say a word. She just placed the bottle on the counter and tried to steady her breathing. As she turned to leave, she saw him. A figure standing by the door, his silhouette towering in the dim light. Dante Romano, the Mafia boss and owner of Morello's. His reputation had preceded him, ruthless, cold, and unforgiving. No one dared to cross him. No one dared to speak out of turn in his presence. But tonight, he was here, quietly observing, not making his usual grand entrance. He'd been at the restaurant for a while, but no one knew. Dante had entered silently, blending into the crowd as if he were just another guest, his sharp eyes scanning the room with the precision of a predator. As Nia walked past him, she felt his gaze follow her, like a weight pressing down on her back. She was used to people watching her, but there was something different about the way he looked at her. It wasn't the typical judgmental stare she'd grown used to. There was something else, something deeper. Nia couldn't shake the feeling that tonight, things were about to change. Nia's hands trembled as she stepped back into the dining room, trying to shake off the sting of the manager's words. The restaurant was still buzzing with activity, but to Nia, it felt like the walls were closing in. The night was dragging on, and she knew the rude comments would only get worse. As she made her way to the next table, she tried to block out the sound of her heart pounding in her chest. She had heard it all before, the whispers, the looks, the judgment, but tonight, it felt different. Something in the air had changed. As she moved through the crowded room, she felt the weight of Dante Romano's eyes on her once again. His presence was like a shadow, looming just beyond her line of sight. She could feel his gaze following her every move, and it made her skin crawl. It was almost as if he could see through the walls she had built to protect herself from the world. Nia tried to focus on her work, but every time she looked up, she found herself glancing in his direction. It wasn't that she was scared, at least not in the usual way. but something about the way he observed her made her feel as if she were part of a much larger game. A game she didn't fully understand. The evening wore on, and the insults from the manager grew bolder. He made another remark about Nia's appearance, this time loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. How does someone like her even get hired here? Probably doesn't even know what a wine decanter is, he said with a laugh, glancing around at the table. Nia's face flushed with embarrassment, but she didn't respond. She couldn't. If she did, she might lose everything. Her job, her source of income, everything that kept her life from falling apart. But then, something unexpected happened. As the manager continued his tirade, Dante Romano stood up from his seat. Nia felt her heart stop. His towering figure cut through the room like a silent storm, his presence demanding attention. As he moved toward the manager, the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Nia could feel the tension thickening in the air. The manager, who had been so confident just moments ago, suddenly seemed smaller, more fragile, in comparison to Dante. Without a word, Dante stepped in front of the manager. His eyes locked onto the man's with a cold, unblinking stare that sent a chill down Nia's spine. The manager froze, caught off guard by Dante's presence. The room fell silent. Nia couldn't believe what was happening. This was the moment she had only ever seen in movies, the moment when the Mafia boss made his move. The manager stammered, but Dante didn't give him a chance to speak. "You will apologize to her," Dante said in a low, controlled voice. "Right now." The words hung in the air like a threat, heavy with authority. The manager looked like he might argue, but one glance from Dante shut him down. Slowly, the manager turned to Nia, his face pale and twisted with humiliation. I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Nia stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. The apology felt hollow, but the power in Dante's command was undeniable. She wasn't sure if she should feel relieved or scared. But what happened next was even more shocking. Dante turned to Nia, his expression softening for the first time that night. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice calm and surprisingly gentle. Nia blinked, still in shock. She had expected him to turn and walk away, to return to his world of power and control, but instead, he was speaking to her, as if she mattered. I'm fine," she managed to say, her voice shaking. She had never been treated like this before, and it was overwhelming. Dante nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment before he turned and walked back to his table. The restaurant seemed to exhale collectively, the tension slowly lifting as Dante's presence faded from the room. Nia stood there, unsure of what to do next. She couldn't remember how long she had been standing still, but when she finally moved, it felt like waking from a dream. The manager was still standing there, his head down in defeat, but Nia barely noticed him anymore. She was too lost in the confusion of the moment. What had just happened? Why had Dante intervened? And more importantly, why had he chosen to stand up for her? As she continued her work, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a random act of kindness. There was something deeper here, something about Dante Romano that she hadn't yet figured out. And as the night went on, she couldn't help but wonder, what was he really doing at Morello's? Nia couldn't stop replaying what had just happened in the restaurant. Dante Romano, the Mafia boss, had stood up for her, something she never expected. For the first time in her life, someone had treated her like she mattered. After the brief interaction with the manager, she had tried to shake off the shock, but the words he had spoken to her echoed in her mind. "Are you okay?" It was the tone of his voice, calm and sincere, that made her stomach twist in confusion. Why would he care? He was a man who owned this entire place, who controlled so much more than just the restaurant. A man who had everything, and yet, he had chosen to stand up for her, a lowly waitress. Nia finished the rest of her shift in a daze, mechanically serving customers as they came and went. The night was long, and yet, the hours seemed to pass in a blur. She could feel Dante's eyes on her every time she walked by his table. It was like he was studying her, observing her, but never saying anything more. When her shift finally ended, Nia retreated to the staff room, the small, dimly lit space where she usually found solace after a long day. The soft hum of the fluorescent light overhead felt oddly comforting, but her mind wouldn't quiet. She couldn't stop thinking about him. Dante Romano. What did he see in her? Why had he defended her? And what did this mean for her future at Morello's? The next day, Nia was scheduled for another shift, but she felt different walking into the restaurant. The place that had once felt cold and impersonal now seemed to hold an unspoken weight, as if something had shifted in the atmosphere. The other staff members treated her the same, with indifference or a polite smile, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. As she went about her duties, she noticed Dante's presence again, this time not as a quiet observer, but as someone who seemed to be actively seeking her out. Every time she entered the dining area, his gaze would find hers, and she would quickly look away, unsure of how to handle the intensity of his stare. It wasn't like he was trying to intimidate her. He never said anything to her, never gave her a direct order. But the weight of his presence was undeniable. It was as if he was waiting for something. As the evening wore on, Nia found herself growing more anxious. What was going on? Why was he paying attention to her? Was this some kind of game to him? And yet, she couldn't bring herself to confront him. It felt too overwhelming, too out of her league. But as the night began to wind down, Nia was surprised to find herself called to the back office. It was the last place she ever expected to go, especially not at the end of her shift. As she walked down the hall toward the office, her heart began to race. When she reached the door, it opened before she could knock. Standing there was Dante Romano himself. His dark eyes locked onto hers as he stepped aside to let her in. "Nia," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Come in." Nia hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside. The office was just as intimidating as the rest of the restaurant, filled with dark wood and expensive furniture. Dante sat behind a large desk, his posture relaxed, but there was a tension in the air that made her uneasy. "I've been watching you," he said, his tone not accusatory, but almost curious. Nia froze, unsure how to respond. What did that mean? "I know you've had a hard time here," he continued, his eyes studying her every movement. "The way they treat you, it's not right." His words took her by surprise. She had never expected him to acknowledge the way she had been treated. Nia started, but her voice caught in her throat. "I don't know what you want from me," she managed to say. Dante leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving her face. "What I want," he said slowly, "is to offer you a choice. I don't tolerate people being mistreated under my roof, and I want you to know that you're not like the rest of them." Nia's mind raced. What was he saying? "I'm offering you a chance to work closer with me. You'll be treated with respect. No more of this humiliation. You'll never have to feel small again." His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Nia's heart was pounding. This was unreal. Was he really offering her a way out? Was this really happening? "But," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "What's the catch?" Dante smiled, but there was something cold in it. "There's no catch," he said, "except that you'll need to prove yourself." Nia felt a knot form in her stomach. Prove herself? How? "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Dante stood up and walked around the desk, coming to stand in front of her. "I need someone I can trust, someone who won't fold under pressure," he said, his voice dropping lower. "Someone who can handle the things I need done." Nia's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what he meant, but the way he said it made her feel both terrified and intrigued. "I'm not asking you to join my world," Dante continued, "but I am asking you to step up. You've already shown me you have more to offer than just being a waitress. I see something in you, Nia." Nia stood frozen, her mind spinning. This was the moment she had been waiting for her whole life, a chance to escape the cycle of poverty and mistreatment. But was she ready to step into a world she didn't fully understand? She didn't know what Dante was asking of her, but she knew one thing for certain. This was a turning point. And whether she was ready or not, her life would never be the same again. Nia's mind was racing as she stood in front of Dante Romano, her thoughts swirling like a storm she couldn't control. The offer he had made to her felt surreal. She had been a waitress, a nameless figure in the background, invisible to most of the world. Now, here she was, standing in front of one of the most powerful men in New York City, and he was offering her something she never imagined. An opportunity, a chance to prove herself. But what did he mean by prove yourself? And what kind of world was she stepping into? She had heard the rumors, the whispers about Dante. He was a mafia boss, ruthless and cold, known for his power and control over everything he touched. But standing in front of him now, she couldn't help but see something else. There was a strange warmth in his eyes, an intensity that made her feel like she mattered. He wasn't like the others. He didn't look at her with disdain or treat her like she was invisible. And yet, she couldn't ignore the fact that he was a dangerous man. His world was one of shadows, power, and secrets, a world she didn't fully understand. But it was a world that could change her life forever. "What do you need me to do?" Nia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dante studied her for a moment, his gaze steady and unwavering. "I need someone who can handle difficult situations," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Someone who can think on their feet, who isn't afraid to step into the unknown and make things happen." Nia nodded slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She had always been the quiet, obedient one, doing what she was told, never stepping out of line. But something in her had shifted after that night, the night when Dante had stood up for her. She was tired of being invisible, of being underestimated. Maybe it was time to take a risk. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. Dante's lips curled into a small smile, but there was something dangerous in his eyes. "Good," he said, "but you need to understand something. This isn't a game. This world isn't like the one you're used to. It's ruthless, and once you step in, there's no turning back." Nia felt a shiver run down her spine. She had known this was coming. She had known that nothing would ever be the same again. But still, she found herself nodding. She was ready. Or at least, she thought she was. "I understand," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Dante walked over to his desk, his movements calm and deliberate. He picked up a folder and handed it to her. "This is the first task I need you to handle. It's important, and it needs to be done quickly and quietly," he said. Nia took the folder, feeling the weight of it in her hands. Inside, there were documents, plans, names, numbers, all of them connected to something bigger than she could comprehend. She looked up at Dante, who was watching her with a steady gaze. "What do you want me to do with this?" she asked. "I want you to find out everything you can about the people behind this. Their connections, their motives, everything. You're not going to the police, Nia. You're going to use your skills to get the information I need. Understand?" Nia nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle deep within her. This wasn't just about being a waitress anymore. It wasn't about serving food or pouring wine. This was real. This was dangerous. "I understand," she repeated, though part of her was still reeling from the sudden shift in her life. Dante stepped closer, his presence filling the room. "Good," he said again. "I'm counting on you." As Nia left the office, the door clicking shut behind her, she couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and excitement. This was the beginning of something new, something she wasn't sure she was ready for. But as she walked through the halls of the restaurant, she felt a strange sense of power growing within her. She wasn't just Nia the waitress anymore. She was something more. She was stepping into a world where she could finally take control of her own destiny. And for better or worse, there was no turning back now. Nia's heart was pounding in her chest as she walked back into the restaurant. The folder Dante had handed her weighed heavily in her hands, its contents swirling in her mind. She had expected to return to her regular duties as a waitress, to slip back into the shadows, but now everything had changed. She was no longer just a server. She was part of something much bigger, something that she didn't yet fully understand. Her first task had been set before her, and the responsibility felt enormous. The documents inside the folder were a maze of names, addresses, and confidential information that seemed to go on forever. It was overwhelming, but Nia had no choice but to dive in head first. Dante had given her a chance, and she couldn't afford to fail him. As she settled into the small, quiet staff room in the back of the restaurant, she spread the papers out before her. The names jumped off the page, many of them unfamiliar, but one stood out. A name she recognized from the rumors she had overheard among the staff at Morello's. Giovanni the Snake Vieri. He was a notorious figure in the underworld, known for his ruthless business dealings and his connections with various crime syndicates. Nia had heard whispers about him, about his connections to the Volkov family and the Italian Mafia, but seeing his name on paper made it all feel too real. She glanced over at the clock. She had only a few hours before her shift began. She needed to act fast. Using the restaurant's computer, Nia started her search. She typed in Giovanni Vieri's name, hoping to find something that would give her a lead. The screen flickered to life, and the results were almost instantaneous. There were records of his past dealings, court cases, and news articles that painted a dark picture of his criminal empire. Nia took a deep breath. This was more than she had bargained for. But she wasn't backing down now. She had already come this far. As she scrolled through the information, she found something that made her blood run cold. A connection between Vieri and Morello's restaurant. It seemed that the Mafia boss had been laundering money through the restaurant's accounts, a practice that had been going on for years without anyone noticing. Nia felt her stomach churn. She had known there were dark things happening behind the scenes, but to see it laid out before her was a different story. This was real. This was dangerous. She needed to find out more. Nia gathered the papers and made her way to the back office, her steps quick and deliberate. She had to tell Dante what she had found. She couldn't do this alone. When she entered his office, he was sitting behind his desk, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "You found something," he said, his voice steady, but there was an edge to it, like he was expecting something big. Nia nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Giovanni Vieri. He's been laundering money through the restaurant. It's all here." She placed the folder on his desk, watching as he flipped through the documents. His face remained neutral, but she could see the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers tightened around the papers. "I knew it was only a matter of time," Dante said, his voice low. "The Vieri family has been a thorn in my side for years. They think they can operate without consequences. But they're wrong." Nia stood still, her hands nervously twisting together. "What do we do now?" she asked. Dante looked up from the folder, his gaze piercing. "Now we finish it." His words were cold, calculated. "You've done well, Nia. But this isn't over. We need to take the next step. I want you to get close to Vieri. You'll be the one to get the information we need to bring him down." Nia's heart skipped a beat. "Get close to him? How am I supposed to do that?" she asked, disbelief creeping into her voice. Dante's eyes softened, but only slightly. "You're resourceful," he said. "You'll figure it out. You've already proven you can handle this. Now it's time to go deeper." The weight of his words hung in the air. Nia had always been good at following orders, at staying in the background, out of trouble. But this was different. This wasn't about staying invisible anymore. This was about taking control, about stepping into a world that had always been beyond her reach. She felt a mix of fear and excitement swirl inside her. This was what she had wanted, wasn't it? A chance to make a difference, to finally have power in her own life. But now that the reality was setting in, she wasn't sure if she was ready. Dante stood up, his tall frame looming over her. "You'll be working closely with me from now on. And you'll be taking on more than just this job. The Vieri family won't go down easily, and there are others who will be watching. But I trust you, Nia. Don't let me down." Nia nodded, feeling the weight of his expectations on her shoulders. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but she knew one thing for certain. There was no turning back now. As she left his office, she felt a sense of determination growing within her. She was about to step into a world she didn't fully understand, but she was ready to play the game. And if she played her cards right, she might just come out on top. Nia's mind raced as she left Dante's office. The weight of his expectations felt like a lead blanket pressing down on her chest. He had asked her to get close to Giovanni Vieri, to step into the underworld of New York's criminal elite, a world she had only heard whispers about. It was a far cry from her life as a waitress, a life of long shifts, tired feet, and quiet nights. But this was different. Dante had given her a chance to prove herself, to step out of the shadows and into a role that could change everything. And that was exactly what terrified her. As she walked through the restaurant's bustling kitchen, the usual noises of clattering pans and shouted orders seemed distant, as though they were coming from another world. She was about to enter that world. The world of men like Giovanni Vieri. Nia couldn't help but feel a surge of doubt. How was she supposed to get close to a man like him? She had no experience in this kind of thing. But Dante trusted her, and that alone kept her moving forward. "I'll figure it out," she whispered to herself. The first step, she decided, was to learn everything she could about Giovanni. She knew he was dangerous, ruthless even, but she had no idea just how far his reach extended. If she was going to get close to him, she needed to understand his world, his connections, his weaknesses, and most importantly, his secrets. It wasn't long before Nia started to piece things together. She spent hours in the back office, poring over old documents, police reports, and financial records. She scoured the internet for any scraps of information she could find about Giovanni Vieri. What she uncovered was a web of deceit, corruption, and power. Everything she had expected and more. Vieri was tied to several illegal operations, ranging from money laundering to smuggling. But the more Nia learned, the more she realized just how deeply he was embedded in the city's criminal underworld. His ties to the Volkov family were undeniable, and he had connections in every corner of New York, from high-end restaurants to dark alley deals. It wasn't just about money for Giovanni. It was about control. The kind of control that Dante fought every day to maintain. The kind of control that would tear everything apart if given the chance. Nia's heart raced as she sifted through the papers. This wasn't just a job anymore. This was personal, and it was dangerous. But that was what made it thrilling. The next step was meeting Giovanni. Nia had no idea how she was going to pull it off, but she knew one thing for sure. She had to act fast. She couldn't afford to wait. The longer she waited, the more dangerous it became. Her meeting with Giovanni would have to be planned carefully, with precision, and it would need to happen soon. She spent the next few days observing the restaurant's clientele, looking for signs, trying to figure out when and how she could make her move. Dante's eyes were always on her, watching from a distance, but never interfering. It was as if he was waiting for her to make the next move, to prove herself worthy of his trust. As the days passed, Nia grew more confident. She knew the risks, but she was determined to prove herself, not just to Dante, but to herself. This was her chance to break free from the life she had known. No more waiting tables. No more being invisible. It was time for Nia Carter to step into the world of power, of secrets, and of danger. She had become part of something bigger than herself. And that night, when Giovanni Vieri walked into the restaurant, Nia was ready. She watched him as he entered, his presence commanding the room. He wasn't just any patron. He was the man who controlled everything. She knew this was her moment, the one she had been preparing for. Her palms were sweaty, but she steadied herself. She had to get close. The next few hours were a blur. Nia moved carefully, weaving through the tables, her eyes always on Giovanni. She saw the way people responded to him, the way they bowed their heads, the way they obeyed his every gesture. It was terrifying and intoxicating at the same time. She didn't know how she was going to approach him, but she knew she couldn't waste any more time. As she made her way to his table, she felt a knot form in her stomach. This was it. There was no turning back now. Giovanni looked up as she approached, his dark eyes meeting hers. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. She could feel his gaze on her, like he was reading every thought in her mind. But Nia didn't flinch. She stood tall, steadying her breath. "May I offer you another drink, sir?" she asked, her voice calm and professional, despite the storm raging inside her. Giovanni didn't answer immediately. He just studied her for a long moment. Nia felt the weight of his scrutiny, but she didn't back down. Finally, he nodded, just slightly, and Nia poured him a glass of wine, her hand steady as she placed it before him. This was the first step. She had made it. She had gotten his attention. And now, the real game was about to begin. Nia couldn't believe what she had just done. Her heart was still pounding in her chest, and her hands were shaking slightly as she walked back into the kitchen. She had gotten Giovanni's attention, just as she had planned. But now, she couldn't help but wonder what he saw. In her. She was just a waitress, after all. But the way he had looked at her, like he was sizing her up, made her feel something she hadn't felt before. Power. For the first time, she wasn't just invisible. She was a part of something. Something bigger than herself. As the night wore on, Nia tried to focus on her duties, but her mind kept drifting back to Giovanni. She had to get closer to him, that much was clear. But how? She had only scratched the surface, and she needed to know more. She needed to understand the man she was dealing with. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how dangerous this was. She was stepping into a world she didn't fully understand, a world where everything could change in an instant. But there was no going back now. Nia had made her choice, and she was going to see it through. The next evening, Nia arrived at the restaurant early. She had spent the past day going over everything she had learned about Giovanni, trying to find a way to get closer to him. She had learned that he often came in around the same time every week, always with a different group of people, always keeping to himself. It was almost as if he was untouchable. But that night, she was determined to change that. As she prepared for her shift, Nia's mind raced with possibilities. She had to get Giovanni to trust her, but how? What could she offer him that no one else could? She couldn't just keep serving him drinks and waiting for an opportunity to strike. She had to be smarter than that. As the evening went on, she noticed him again. Giovanni was seated at the same table, the one in the back corner, surrounded by a few men she recognized as part of his inner circle. His cold eyes scanned the room, never resting on anyone for too long. Nia was certain that he hadn't forgotten her. He had noticed her the night before, and now, she had to make sure he noticed her again. She walked past his table, as casually as she could manage, making sure to give him a small, almost imperceptible glance. He didn't acknowledge her at first, but she could feel his eyes on her. A moment later, his voice cut through the noise of the restaurant. "You," Giovanni said, his voice low and commanding. Nia's heart skipped a beat. She stopped in her tracks and turned to face him. "Come here," he said again, his eyes locking onto hers. Nia's breath caught in her throat, but she moved toward him, her feet steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. As she approached, Giovanni's gaze never wavered. She stopped a few feet away, waiting for him to speak. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. And then, Giovanni spoke. "You're different," he said, his voice almost thoughtful. "I don't usually like being interrupted, but last night, you surprised me." Nia swallowed, unsure of what to say. She had expected this moment, but the reality of it was more overwhelming than she had imagined. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to." Giovanni raised his hand, silencing her. "Don't apologize," he said. "You didn't do anything wrong. You saw something, and you acted on it. That's what I like about you." Nia was taken aback. She had expected anger, maybe even a threat, but instead, he seemed to be impressed. "You're smart," Giovanni continued. "I've been watching you, and I don't think I've been wrong about you." Nia couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement. He was noticing her. He was actually acknowledging her. But she had to be careful. This wasn't the time to let her guard down. "I'm just doing my job," she replied, keeping her voice steady. Giovanni chuckled, a low, almost amused sound. "Your job," he said, "is to blend into the background. But you don't. You never have. That's what makes you interesting." He leaned back in his chair, studying her intently. "You want more than this, don't you?" he asked. The question caught her off guard, but it was the one she had been avoiding. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. Giovanni smirked. "You want more than serving drinks and cleaning tables. You want to be part of something bigger. You want power." Nia's mind raced. How did he know? How could he possibly know what she was thinking? She had kept her desires hidden, buried beneath the surface. But Giovanni seemed to see right through her. "You're wrong," she said quickly, though she wasn't sure if she was trying to convince him or herself. Giovanni's eyes narrowed. "Am I? I don't think so. But you'll have to prove it to me." He stood up and motioned for her to follow him. Nia hesitated for a moment, but then, she followed. She had no idea where this was going, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life was about to change. And there was no going back now. Nia followed Giovanni through the restaurant, her steps deliberate, but her mind was racing. The moment he had asked her to come with him, she had known things were changing. The air felt different, charged with something she couldn't quite name. Giovanni was leading her to the back of the building, through the staff-only area where the kitchen hums with activity and the waitstaff rushed to meet deadlines. But Giovanni moved like a king among the servants, with no concern for the chaos around him. Nia had to keep her pace steady, her heart pounding in her chest. Every fiber of her being was screaming to turn back, but she couldn't. She was already in this deep. Giovanni opened a door and stepped inside, turning to wait for her. She hesitated for just a second before following him into a small, private office. The room was dimly lit, with thick mahogany furniture that made the space feel heavier, more imposing. Nia felt out of place in the elegant surroundings, but she didn't show it. Giovanni motioned for her to sit, and she did, a little too quickly, trying to calm the nerves coursing through her. He took a seat opposite her, his eyes never leaving her face. "So, you want more than just this?" he asked, his voice low and commanding, as if he were reading her every thought. She swallowed hard, but met his gaze. This was the moment when everything would change. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "I want more. I want to be a part of something bigger." Giovanni's lips curled into a slight smile. "I thought so," he murmured. You've been playing it safe for too long, haven't you, Nia? You've kept your head down, done what you were told, but you're smarter than that. I've seen it in you from the beginning. His words sent a shiver down her spine. He saw her, really saw her. She had never felt that way before, like someone was finally looking past the surface, seeing the woman she had always known she could be. But that was the part that terrified her. Giovanni wasn't just any man. He wasn't someone who treated people like equals. He was a mafia boss, and people like him didn't care about feelings. They cared about power. He leaned forward, his hands resting on the desk in front of him. You want in, don't you? He asked, his voice almost a whisper, but with the weight of a command. Nia didn't hesitate. Yes, she said again, her words stronger this time. I want to be a part of what you're doing. I want to help. Giovanni studied her for a long moment, his eyes piercing as though he were trying to figure out if she was sincere or just playing a game. Finally, he spoke. All right, he said, his tone colder now. If you want to be a part of this world, you need to understand that it's not about just following orders. It's about making decisions. It's about doing what's necessary, no matter the cost. Nia nodded, her pulse quickening. She had known what she was stepping into. But hearing the words out loud made it all feel more real. She wasn't just some bystander anymore. She was going to be a player in this game. And there was no going back. Giovanni stood up, walking around the desk. He stopped behind her, his presence so overpowering that she could feel the heat of it even though he was a few feet away. I'll give you a chance, Nia, he said, his voice steady and unwavering. You're going to prove yourself to me. You're going to show me that you're not just some waitress who wants a better life. You're going to show me that you can handle the power that comes with being part of my world. He paused for a moment before continuing, his voice quieter now. And if you pass the test, Nia, you'll be rewarded. You'll have everything you've ever wanted. The question is, are you willing to do what it takes? Nia felt a cold rush of adrenaline. This was it. This was the moment that would define everything. She could back out now, go back to the safety of her old life, pretending she had never dreamed of something more. But she knew, deep down, that she could never go back. Not after everything that had happened. She looked up at him, her eyes steady. I'm ready, she said, her voice filled with certainty. Giovanni smiled again, but this time there was something darker in his eyes. Good, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Then let's see how far you'll go, Nia. Let's see if you're really ready to join the world that I control. He stepped back, giving her space to breathe. Nia felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. She wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't just the invisible waitress in the background. She was a part of something much bigger now, and she would do whatever it took to prove she belonged in this world. Giovanni turned toward the door, his back to her. We start tonight, he said, his tone final. Be ready. Nia nodded, watching him leave the room. The door closed behind him, and she was left alone with her thoughts. Her life was about to change, and there was no going back. Nia's hands shook slightly as she prepared for the night ahead. The world she was about to step into felt darker, more dangerous than anything she had ever imagined. Giovanni had given her a chance, and she couldn't afford to waste it. He had told her she had to prove herself, and tonight, she would do just that. The night began like any other, the usual clattering of dishes, the soft murmur of conversations around the restaurant, but Nia's mind was elsewhere. Every sound, every movement felt amplified. She knew tonight would be different. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes. As she moved through the restaurant, she kept her eyes open, scanning the room. She knew Giovanni would be here, and she had no idea what he expected from her. All she could do was wait for him to make his move. After a few hours, she saw him. Giovanni sat at his usual spot, surrounded by a few of his associates. His dark eyes scanned the room, his sharp gaze never lingering too long on anyone, but Nia could feel it. He was watching her. She steeled herself and approached his table with a tray of drinks. Her hands were steady, but her heart raced. She had to stay calm, keep her composure. As she set the drinks down in front of Giovanni, their eyes met. For a brief moment, Nia felt as though the entire room disappeared. There was something in his gaze, something that made her feel both exposed and powerful. Nia, he said, his voice low, almost a command. Come here. Her stomach tightened, but she didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, standing just a few feet away from him. He motioned for her to sit, and she did, her breath caught in her throat. You've been doing well, Giovanni said, his voice cool, but not unkind. I've been watching you. Nia swallowed, unsure of how to respond. She had known this was coming, but hearing him say it aloud made it feel too real. I'm ready, she said, the words coming out more confidently than she felt. Giovanni's lips curled into a small, approving smile. I know you are, he said, but I need to see more. You've been serving drinks, but I want to know if you can handle something bigger. Nia nodded, her pulse quickening. This was it. This was the moment she had been preparing for. Giovanni's eyes narrowed slightly, as if measuring her reaction. I want you to take care of something for me tonight, he said, his tone suddenly serious. There's a man in this restaurant who owes me. He's been dodging my people for weeks. I need you to make sure he pays up. Nia's mind raced. She had no idea what Giovanni meant by take care of, but she had a feeling it wasn't just about collecting a debt. How do you want me to handle it? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear starting to creep in. Giovanni's eyes glinted with something dangerous, something Nia hadn't seen before. You'll figure it out, he said. But you can't let him get away. He's a liability. Nia felt a chill run down her spine. This was her test. This wasn't just about serving drinks or playing the part. This was about doing what was necessary to survive in Giovanni's world. She could feel the weight of his expectations on her shoulders. She was in too deep now. There was no turning back. Giovanni watched her for a moment, then stood. I'll be watching, he said, his voice low. Make sure you handle this. You've earned your place here, but it's only as good as your next move. Nia nodded, feeling the pressure mounting. As Giovanni turned and walked away, she took a deep breath. She had to find this man, and she had to make sure he paid. Her mind raced as she scanned the room, looking for anyone who might fit the description Giovanni had given her. It didn't take long. A man at the far end of the room caught her eye. He was talking to one of the other patrons, but Nia could tell from the way he held himself, like he didn't belong, that he was the one. She moved closer, her steps quiet but purposeful. The closer she got, the more she could feel the tension building in her chest. This wasn't just a regular customer. This was the man who was about to change everything for her. As she reached his table, the man looked up. His eyes were dull, lifeless, but there was something about him that made Nia's stomach turn. She could feel the weight of his debt hanging in the air. She wasn't sure how to start, but she knew she couldn't waste time. You owe my boss, she said, her voice cool, controlled. The man blinked at her, clearly confused. What do you mean? He asked. Nia took a deep breath. This was it. She had to make him understand. Giovanni Romano doesn't take kindly to people who don't pay their debts. You need to settle up tonight, she said, her voice firm. The man's face paled, and for a brief moment, Nia saw fear flash in his eyes. It was a fleeting moment, but it was enough. She had him. The man started to speak, but Nia cut him off. Don't make this harder than it has to be, she said, her voice steady. You know what you owe? Pay up, and this is over. The man swallowed, then nodded. I'll get the money, he said quickly. Nia stood there, watching him, knowing that this moment was the beginning of something much bigger. She had passed the test. She had done what Giovanni had asked. And now, there was no turning back. Nia stood at the back of the restaurant, her pulse still racing from the encounter with Giovanni's debtor. The man had handed over the money, nervously slipping it into her palm, like he couldn't wait to get out of there. He had been terrified, just as Giovanni had intended. She had done it. She had passed the test. But as she walked back to the kitchen, the weight of what she had just done settled on her shoulders. This wasn't just about collecting a debt. It was about proving herself in a world that didn't forgive mistakes, where one wrong move could mean the end of everything. She had stepped into the lion's den, and now she had to survive it. As she placed the money in the back office, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was shifting around her. The power, the control, it was intoxicating, but it was also suffocating. The life she had known, the life where she simply served drinks and took orders, seemed so far away now. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She had made a choice, and choices like these didn't come without consequences. Dante had been watching, she knew. She could feel his eyes on her from across the room, studying her every move, waiting for her to falter. But he hadn't shown any sign of disappointment. Instead, when he had come over to her after the encounter, he had nodded, a small, approving gesture. You did well, he had said, and something in his voice made her stomach flip. She didn't want to disappoint him. He had given her this chance, and she would not squander it. The restaurant started to empty out, the usual chatter fading into the background as the staff cleaned up. Nia moved quickly, her thoughts racing. She was about to step into Giovanni's world full force. She didn't know what the future held, but she had no intention of letting herself fail. The next few days passed in a blur of shifts, paperwork, and quiet observation. Giovanni remained elusive, appearing only when absolutely necessary. Nia, on the other hand, had become more attuned to his world. She started to pick up on the subtle signals around her, the way people looked at her, the way the staff treated her now that they knew she had Giovanni's attention. She was no longer just another face in the crowd. People watched her now, as though they were waiting for her to make her move, to prove she belonged in this world. Then came the night that would change everything. Nia had just finished another busy shift when Dante called her into his office. His voice on the phone had been calm, but there was an edge to it that made her heart race. "Come to my office," he had said, and nothing more. She was nervous as she walked to the back, her mind running through 1,000 possibilities. When she stepped inside, Dante was already there, standing by the window, looking out at the city. His posture was tense, but he didn't turn to face her immediately. "I have a new job for you," he said, his voice steady. Nia's stomach dropped. "What kind of job?" she asked. Dante turned to face her then, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "You've done well so far, Nia, but it's time to prove you're more than just a go-between. I need you to take care of something. Personally." His words sent a chill through her. She had no idea what he meant, but she was certain it wouldn't be simple. "What exactly do you mean?" she asked. Dante stepped forward, his gaze never leaving her face. "I want you to deal with someone who's been causing me trouble. Someone who thinks they can cross me and get away with it." Nia's heart skipped a beat. She had heard the rumors, the whispers about Giovanni's enemies, but she had never expected to be asked to take on something so dangerous. "Who?" she asked, her voice steady despite the rising fear inside her. Dante's eyes darkened. "There's a man, someone who's been getting too comfortable. He's been leaking information to the wrong people. He's a liability, and I need him gone." The words sent a shock through her. "Gone." It was clear what he meant. "I need you to take care of it," Dante said again, his tone final. "Do what you have to do." Nia stood there, her mind racing. This wasn't just about serving drinks or delivering messages anymore. This was real. This was the kind of world she had only heard about in stories, the kind of world where people disappeared without a trace. "I'll do it," she said, her voice low and resolute. She had made a decision. She had chosen this path, and she would see it through. Dante nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Good. You'll be ready, Nia. I trust you to do what's necessary." With that, he turned away, returning to his spot by the window. Nia stood there for a moment longer, her heart pounding in her chest. She had crossed a line. Now, one she couldn't uncross. The rest of the night felt like a blur as she made her way home. She knew what she had to do. She knew the risks. But there was no turning back now. The night felt heavier than usual as Nia walked through the quiet streets on her way home. Dante's words still echoed in her mind. "Take care of it." He hadn't explained the details, hadn't told her how to do it, but he had made it clear that there was no room for hesitation, no room for mistakes. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her with every step she took. Her mind raced, trying to wrap itself around what she was about to do. She had already crossed one line when she agreed to work for Giovanni. But this was something else entirely. She was about to take someone's life. As she reached her apartment, she stood in front of the door for a moment, her hand resting on the doorknob. She had no idea how she was supposed to handle it. How did someone like her go from being a waitress, serving drinks and taking orders, to carrying out orders for a mafia boss? It felt surreal. She hadn't signed up for this. Or had she? She had known what kind of world she was stepping into. Dante had been clear about that. But now that the moment had arrived, she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. She pushed the door open, stepping into the quiet apartment. The silence felt deafening. It had been a long day, a long few days, and the weight of everything was starting to sink in. She sat down at her small kitchen table, her hands shaking as she took the envelope from her bag. Inside was the information Giovanni had given her, the name of the man she was supposed to take care of. His name was Marco Petrov, a low-level informant who had been leaking information to the wrong people. The man was dangerous, but not in the way Nia had imagined. He wasn't some hardened criminal. He was just someone who had made the wrong decisions and found himself tangled in a web of lies and deceit. Still, he had betrayed Giovanni. And betrayal in this world came with a price. Nia stared at the envelope, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. She knew what she had to do. It was simple, really, but the reality of it was harder to face. She had to take action. She couldn't back down now. She wasn't just doing this for Giovanni. She was doing this for herself, for her future. But even as she made that decision, doubt crept in. What if this was a mistake? What if she couldn't live with herself afterward? What if it changed her forever? She didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing. This was her choice. It was her decision, and it was too late to turn back now. She had already made her move. The next morning, Nia dressed quickly, her movements sharp and deliberate. She had a plan, or at least, she thought she did. The address for Marco's apartment was written on the back of the envelope. It was a small, run-down building on the outskirts of the city, far from the sleek, polished world of Giovanni's empire. Nia could already feel the tension building in her chest. She didn't know how she was supposed to do this, but she knew she couldn't hesitate. She had to keep moving forward. When she arrived at the building, she took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She had been in dangerous situations before, but this was different. This wasn't just a confrontation. This wasn't just a warning. She was here to end it. She approached the door of Marco's apartment, her hand resting on the cool metal of the doorframe. She could hear muffled voices from inside, but they didn't sound like anything important. She waited for a moment, gathering her thoughts. She wasn't sure what to expect when she went in there, but she knew one thing. She had to act fast. She knocked, her heart pounding in her chest. The door opened a moment later, revealing Marco. He was younger than she had expected, not much older than her, and he looked confused when he saw her standing there. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice tentative. Nia took a deep breath, her nerves threatening to get the best of her. But she couldn't let that happen. She had a job to do. "I'm here to talk," she said, her voice steady. Marco raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About the information you've been giving to the wrong people," she said, her eyes hardening. Marco's face shifted from confusion to fear in an instant. He must have realized who she was working for. He stepped back from the door. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice now panicked. Nia didn't answer. She stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind her. She could feel the weight of the moment settling over her. She had no idea how it would end, but she knew it had to end. This was her test. She had to finish it. As Marco backed away, trying to make sense of what was happening, Nia took a step forward, the adrenaline making her hands shake. She had the gun in her pocket, and she knew what she had to do. It wasn't easy. It wasn't quick, but it was necessary. And as she pulled the trigger, she felt something inside of her snap. The room fell silent. Marco fell to the ground, and Nia stood there, frozen. The reality of what she had just done crashed into her like a tidal wave. She had crossed the line. She had crossed the line, and there was no turning back. Nia stood in the dimly lit apartment, the cold silence surrounding her like a heavy fog. Marco's body lay motionless on the floor, the weight of what she had just done crashing over her in waves. Her breath was shallow, her pulse racing, but there was no time to process it. No time to feel anything. She had crossed a line, and it wasn't just a figurative one anymore. It was real, and it was irreversible. She could hear her heartbeat thundering in her ears as she stared at the man she had just killed. The gun felt cold in her hand, its weight a constant reminder of what she had done. She had been prepared for this moment. Or at least, she thought she was. Dante had told her to prove herself, to handle what needed to be done, and she had done it. But now, standing in the aftermath, Nia wasn't sure what to feel. Was she supposed to feel relief? Satisfaction? Fear? She couldn't decide. The reality of what had just happened seemed too surreal, too impossible. She had taken a life that was tied to a world so far removed from everything she had ever known. Nia stood there, for what felt like hours, just staring at Marco's lifeless form, as though hoping that if she didn't move, she could somehow pretend it hadn't happened. But she couldn't. She had to act. She had to clean up the mess, both literally and figuratively. She quickly wiped down the gun and placed it back into her bag, then reached for the phone in her pocket. She had no choice now. She had to report to Dante. As her fingers hovered over the number, doubt started to creep in. What would he say? What would he think? She had done exactly what he had asked, But something in the back of her mind told her this wasn't the end of it. Nothing ever was with people like Giovanni. She took a deep breath and dialed the number. The phone rang 3 times before Dante picked up. "What's done?" His voice was calm, almost too calm, like he was expecting this. Nia's stomach tightened. "It's done," she said, her voice flat. "He's gone." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Nia wondered if he was disappointed, if he was regretting bringing her into this world. But then Dante spoke again. "Good," he said simply. "You've proven yourself. Now, we move forward." His words hit her like a punch to the gut. "Move forward?" she repeated. "What does that mean?" Dante didn't answer immediately. "It means," he said finally, "that you're in now. This isn't just a one-time thing. You've seen how it works. And now, you're a part of it." Nia's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if she should feel pride or fear. This was exactly what she had wanted, wasn't it? A chance to step up, to prove she was more than just a waitress, to show that she belonged in this world. But now that she was in it, she wasn't sure if she was ready. "What do I do now?" she asked, her voice quiet, unsure. Dante's voice softened slightly, but only just. "You'll get your next assignment soon. But for now, keep your head down. The people around you will start to notice, and you need to stay sharp." Nia nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Okay," she said, her voice steady, though her hands were trembling. Dante let out a quiet sigh. "You've done well, Nia," he said, and for the first time, his voice sounded almost approving. "But remember this, loyalty is everything. You do what I tell you, and I'll make sure you're rewarded. But if you cross me," his voice dropped, the threat clear in his tone, "don't make me remind you of what happens to people who betray me." Nia's stomach twisted. She knew what he meant. She had seen enough of the underworld to know that betrayal wasn't just frowned upon. It was punished, ruthlessly and without mercy. She took another deep breath, steadying herself. "I won't betray you," she said, her voice firm. "Good," Dante replied. "Now get some rest. You've earned it. But don't get comfortable. This is just the beginning." The line went dead, and Nia lowered her phone, her mind still spinning. She had done what she needed to do. She had proved herself. But now, there was no going back. As she looked around the small apartment, the walls seemed to close in on her. She had made a choice, and that choice had set her on a path she couldn't turn away from. She was part of Giovanni's world now, and there was only one way forward, deeper into the darkness. She wasn't sure how much further she could go, but one thing was certain. There was no turning back. The weight of everything Nia had done seemed to settle into her bones. Her life had changed in ways she could hardly comprehend, but the truth was inescapable. She was part of Giovanni's world now. There was no turning back. The late nights, the decisions that lingered in her mind, and the way people around her looked at her, it all pointed to the same conclusion. She was no longer just Nia, the waitress. She was something different. She had earned her place, but what she had learned, what she had done, had left scars, scars that no amount of time would heal. Dante's words still echoed in her head, his voice as cool and commanding as ever. "You've proven yourself. But remember, loyalty is everything. Do what I tell you, and I'll reward you. Cross me, and you'll regret it." The threats, though subtle, were always there, always lurking in the background of every conversation. The world she had entered was not kind to the weak. Giovanni and Dante both knew that. And now, so did she. It had been a week since her first task, and while everything appeared normal on the surface, Nia felt the pressure mounting. She was part of the operation now, involved in things that were too dark, too dangerous to fully grasp. The small victories, like the one with Marco, had come at a cost. She had done what was expected of her, but at what cost? She couldn't shake the feeling that, somewhere along the way, she had lost a piece of herself. As she prepared for another shift at Morello's, she took a moment to reflect. The restaurant was as busy as ever. The same customers, the same clattering of plates, the same hum of quiet conversations. But she no longer felt invisible. Now, she was a part of the world these people barely saw. The man who had once been just another face in the crowd was now in the inner circle, operating under the watchful eye of one of the most dangerous men in New York City. And she had become something she had never imagined. Someone who could make decisions, who could dictate how things went. As she walked through the restaurant, she couldn't help but notice the way the other staff interacted with her. There was respect in their eyes now, a silent acknowledgement that she was no longer just another servant. But with that respect came something else, fear. They didn't know what she was capable of, but they knew enough to stay out of her way. As she passed the tables, she caught sight of Giovanni sitting in his usual spot, his eyes scanning the room, always calculating, always watching. He gave her a small nod when their eyes met, a silent signal that things were moving forward. She wasn't sure where they were going, but she knew one thing. She was in too deep to back out now. The door to the kitchen swung open, and Dante stepped inside, his usual calm demeanor a mask for the tension that was thick in the air. "We have a situation," he said, his voice carrying the weight of something far more serious than a simple restaurant task. Nia felt a chill run through her. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice steady. Dante's gaze met hers. "There's someone who's been trying to play both sides. Someone who thinks they can use us for their own gain." He paused for a moment, letting the silence stretch between them. "We need to make an example." Nia swallowed hard, understanding exactly what he meant. "You want me to handle it," she said, the words coming out of her mouth before she even realized she had spoken them. Dante didn't answer immediately, but the look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. This was the moment. The moment she would prove herself again. The moment she would make it clear that she wasn't afraid of the consequences. "Yes," Dante said finally. "I trust you, Nia. You've proven yourself before. Now, it's time to finish what we started." Nia nodded, her resolve hardening. She was no longer just an observer. She was in the center of this, a part of the family, and she had to act like it. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing. She had done the hard part already. The next step would be no different. As Dante left the kitchen, Nia took a deep breath. She had become something she never thought she would be, a player in this dangerous game. And now, the stakes were higher. This wasn't just about proving herself to Giovanni or Dante. This was about survival. As she made her way to the back office to prepare, the reality of her situation began to settle in. She was playing with fire, but there was something intoxicating about it. The fear, the power, the control, it all mixed together in a way that made her feel alive in a way she had never experienced before. But she knew she couldn't let that power control her. She had to stay sharp. She had to keep her eyes on the prize. And when it was all over, she would be the one who walked away from this. Stronger. Unbroken. She just had to make sure she didn't let anyone see the cracks that had already begun to form beneath the surface. She was ready. The game had just begun, and she was going to win it. In this thrilling journey of romance stories, Nia finds herself in a dangerous and unexpected world, where betrayal and loyalty collide. After taking a life, she becomes deeply entangled in the Mafia's intricate web, proving herself to those who hold power over her. As Nia struggles with the reality of her choices, she becomes a key player in a game that could change everything for her. In the midst of all the darkness, there's an undeniable spark of connection that pulls her deeper into the fold. This is not just a story of survival, but also a tale of transformation and resilience, showcasing how far someone will go when their deepest desires and fears are tested. Romance stories are often about love and loss, but in this tale, the stakes are even higher. Nia must navigate a world full of dangerous people, all while questioning her own morality and decisions. With the pressure mounting, she's forced to confront the reality of her place in this shadowy world. Will she thrive or fall victim to the very people she's trying to impress? This is more than a romantic adventure. It's a dark and powerful narrative that takes you into the heart of temptation, power, and redemption. If you're drawn to romance stories with a twist, filled with suspense and unexpected turns, this is the kind of story that will keep you on the edge of your seat, eager for what's next. Get ready for a captivating experience that explores the choices we make and the lives we touch, all set in the gritty underworld of power and desire.